You ever have that feeling like you're living your life, but it's all happening behind a thin sheet of glass? You're there, you're present, but you're not quite connected. Well, today we're going to talk about a quiet, often invisible experience that can shape our entire adult lives. It's called childhood emotional neglect. This idea really gets right to the heart of the whole thing. Just picture it. A child, emotionally reaching out, calling for connection, for validation, and hearing absolutely nothing back. Just silence. And in that silence, a kid doesn't just feel ignored. No, they learned a really deep lesson about their own worth.
Because think about it. A child doesn't blame the room for being empty. A child internalizes that silence. They learn to believe that their own voice, their own feelings, simply weren't important enough to get a response. And that's where it all begins.
For a long time, psychology has mostly focused on trauma as something you can point to, right? A distinct event, a car crash, an assault, something with a really clear before and after. And look, that's totally valid, but it leaves this huge category of suffering completely unnamed. And that right there is the crucial question. What about the trauma of the things that didn't happen? What about the birthday that was just forgotten? The tears that nobody came to check on? Or the consistent day-in, day-out failure of a caregiver to simply tune in? These absences, they don't always feel like they count, but man, they leave real marks.
So let's actually put a name to this experience. We're going to shift our focus from the idea of what happened to you to the profound impact of what consistently didn't. This slide really breaks down a crucial distinction. On one side, you've got what we could call acts of commission. These are events that happened. But on the other side, you have acts of omission, the consistent absence of the emotional connection and validation that a child absolutely needs to build their inner world.
And here it is, the formal definition. Now, the key words you really want to focus on are consistent failure. This is not about a parent having one bad day or a single missed moment. We all have those. This is a persistent pattern, a chronic lack of emotional response that just becomes the normal backdrop of a childhood.
You know, if any of this is sounding familiar, you might also be familiar with that nagging feeling that you're just being dramatic or oversensitive. But it is so essential to understand that just because these wounds are invisible, it doesn't mean they aren't real. They are. They absolutely are. So how does this actually play out when we become adults? Well, paradoxically, it often creates people who look, from the outside, like they have it all together.
This is a classic profile, right? The person who is so competent, so reliable, always there for everybody else. The one everyone just assumes is okay because they learned at such a young age that just presenting is fine was the only way to get by.
Dr. Jonas Webb, the psychologist who really pioneered this whole concept, uses this brilliant phrase, and it perfectly captures that vague, persistent feeling of disconnection. That sense that everyone else seems to have access to an emotional frequency that you just can't quite find.
This brings us to one of the core consequences. I mean, if no one ever reflected your feelings back to you, how on earth would you learn to recognize them yourself? A caregiver saying, "Wow, you seem really sad right now," isn't just comforting, it's teaching. It's literally building the vocabulary for your inner world.
And without that teaching, this can happen. Alexithymia. It's not some kind of personality flaw. It's a developmental gap that was left by that absence of emotional mirroring. It's the technical term for that baffling, frustrating inability to know what you're actually feeling.
And in relationships, this is where it can get really painful. A genuine compliment feels suspicious. Consistent love can feel suffocating, not safe. You might find yourself pushing people away right when things start to feel real, because deep down, you learned that needing anyone is a liability.
Okay, now we're at what I think is the most important reframing in this entire explainer. We really need to stop looking at these behaviors as defects and start seeing them for what they actually were. Let me say that again because it's so important. The way you learned to behave was not a mistake, it was a solution, a brilliant, incredibly well-adapted solution to a situation that required you to shrink, to need less, to expect less, simply to survive.
So maybe you became the quiet one because you learned that silence keeps you safe, or the funny one because humor got you some attention. Maybe the high achiever because success earned you visibility, or the caretaker because meeting everyone else's needs gave you a sense of purpose. Whatever it was, you were using the only tools you had. You figured out what worked, and you did it remarkably well. So what's the problem?
Well, the problem is we don't automatically stop using these tools just because the danger is over. But the good news is it's not permanent. Healing is absolutely possible, and it starts with something a lot smaller than you might think.
I want you to forget the idea of some single, dramatic, movie-like moment of catharsis. Healing from this is a slow, quiet process. It's about finally deciding that your own experience, your own feelings are worth taking seriously.
So here's a simple, but definitely not easy, way to start. Step 1. Just notice a feeling, any feeling, and try to do it without judgment. Step 2. Pause before you do your usual thing, like deflecting a compliment. Step 3. Get curious. Ask yourself, why did I just do that? And finally, Step 4. Validate that experience. Just tell yourself that your inner world is worth paying attention to. Every single time you do this, you are teaching yourself the very thing you were never taught.
It might feel so small and insignificant at first, but these little moments of paying attention, they add up, they accumulate. Every single time you honestly check in with yourself, something shifts. You are, in effect, becoming the responsive, attuned parent to yourself that you never had.
And that brings us right back to where we started. The problem was never your voice. It was never the sound you were making. It was the room. And the most hopeful part of all of this? Now you get to build a new room, one where you finally learn to hear yourself.